Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the VandySports podcast. Here's your host, Chris Lee. Commodore fans, on your feet. It's time to anchor down.
Welcome to the VandySports podcast presented by Dr. Jody Jones, part of the 440 Sports Network. I'm your host, Chris Lee, wishing you a happy new year. Today, we are going to start a small series of podcasts. This is our 20th anniversary this week of founding the website VandySports.com. So with that, I'm going to go back and look at the last 20 years through different lenses. One is Luke Wyatt, who I didn't know most of the time I covered Vanderbilt sports, but Luke has provided a very valuable resource to me and to the show on just some background of what was going on over the years. So Luke and I will dive into a not always pleasant conversation about how Vanderbilt sports got to where things are and some things I covered, and I'll get his take on those. Luke appears on the guest line. That is presented by Michael Kendrick of the Kendrick Group. Michael's a local carpenter and a lifelong Vandy fan. He builds bookshelves, cabinets, picture frames, furniture, and made-to-order items, including a display case for my prized Dale Murphy jersey. I've seen Michael's work. He's a true craftsman. If you're in the market for custom woodwork, give Michael a call at 615-830-9458. Now we'll get to our interview with Luke Wyatt, and just so you know, I'll have interviews coming with Mike Rapp, who is one of the founding partners at the site, and of course our good friend Seabass, who's been probably the most frequent podcast guest we've had over the years. I'll get to those when those guys have time. But anyway, I hope you appreciate the interview we did with Luke today. Luke Wyatt joins me today on a special episode of the podcast. Luke, we started doing the site 20 years ago this week. I don't know if that deserves a congratulations or a condemnation or something, but it is what it is, and here we are, and thank you for joining us.
Well, let's just say this. You've been very resilient.
Stupid might be another word for it, but something.
No, and Chris, it's interesting. When it first started, I kind of look back, and of course, mine reaches farther back than that. Mine goes 40 years, twice that amount of time. And when you kind of started things, after about 3 or 4 years into it, things got pretty good at Vanderbilt. And then the last 5, I don't know how you have any hair left.
Well, the hair I've got is turning colors, and it's the last 5 years. Honestly, I think a lot now. And I'll talk about this with probably Mike Rapp. He founded it with me, but I think now, if I had to go back 20 years ago and do this all over again, knowing what I know, the good, the bad, and everything, now I don't know what I'd do. I mean, because I think looking back on it now, there's 2 times I think I should have walked away. Although, I mean, that would have been contingent on me finding other work and whatever. One of them was, and I'll talk to Mike about this, around 2014. And the other time would have been when they just completely botched the AD hire. When I talked to someone and it was clear that they were not interested in finding a good AD as much as they were finding an AD that checked whatever boxes over there. That's maybe the date that I would have missed covering a national title, but I think it would have been worth it knowing what was around the corner.
Yeah, you could have just enjoyed that national title from afar. That's one of the biggest mistakes ever. I looked at getting ahead of us a little bit here. I looked at some of the mailbag questions I had, and I think one of them was something about what are 2 or 3 of the best decisions made and 2 or 3 of the worst. And that fits in the latter category for sure.
Yeah, it's been something. And I go back and I look, and a word that you use is vanditized.
Yes.
That you kind of get used to covering what is in front of you. And I'll probably deal with this more with Mike later. But I go back 20 years ago, I guess 19 and a half now. That's when we had just started the site. And they declared they were getting rid of Todd Turner and restructuring the AD. And at the time, we're just like, oh, that's a great move.
Yeah.
Because we're being fed stuff and you don't know any better. When that's the team that you follow, you don't know how things are done differently at other places. But that's one that you go back and, at least in my mind, you're like, wait, can they have a do-over on that one, please?
Well, I can give a little insight to that. That's kind of strange. As an athletic department employee at the time, you're wondering, what does this mean? You're trying to gather all the information you can to see where, will it affect my job? Will it affect the longevity and that type of thing? And I'll never forget when we had a departmental meeting and Gordon Gee and David Williams came in and spoke to the athletic department. And David Williams used these scary words. He said, either you drink the Kool-Aid or you're not here. That's the way he put it. And from that day forward, everyone just kind of walked on eggshells, and it was a pretty scary situation because it was very intimidating as an employee, and I didn't like the choice of words. I'm not a big fan of Jim Jones and what happened in Guyana, and every time I hear that, I think of that. So,
what was behind all that?
Well, here's what I was told, and it made sense. It didn't. At first, I thought, "Oh, what are we doing? Is this the move to go to Division III or something?" And then I started talking to people who were the bean counters and people that worked in athletics as far as and handled budgets larger than what I handled. And they told me, Luke, what it's going to do now that, like, the student rec and some other things would fall under the umbrella of athletics. Now that you'd have that, you'd have access to more budgets, which meant you would have access to more money. And that's where the department was at the time, and still is, I assume, is short on funds and short on, we're always, I've said it before, when I was there, they never said it out loud, but we ran on what was called a 9-month budget. Because when we get to July every year, we were told you can't spend any more money. We got a budget freeze. Well, to me, that tells me we have 9 months of a budget because it was consistent that way. I think maybe 1 or 2 years I was there, we still were able to buy things after July 1st. And it wasn't just my department. It was every department. There was a budget freeze. So, money was always an issue, whether it was mismanaged or just wasn't enough to start with, I don't know.
Well, that to me was just like a typical Vanderbilt thing, right?
Yeah.
And I get it was to free up budgets, but like, why can't you just do things the normal way? Like, if I want to go to my next door neighbor's house, I have 3 options. One of them is to walk up my garage, take a left turn, and walk about 75 feet to their front door.
Right.
The other one is to take a right turn and walk either about a 0.7 of a mile or 1.1 of a mile loop around my neighborhood. And it seems like at Vanderbilt, that was sort of a foretelling of what the next 20 years of covering this would be like, because instead of just making the short walk, they take the long loop around the neighborhood and then tell you why they're right and everybody else is wrong.
I saw that a myriad of times at Vanderbilt. It's like banging your head against the wall, man. It was so frustrating. You couldn't get answers. And one of the pat answers I would get from administration at times was, we have a method for this madness. And I said, well, I will tell you this. It's madness. You got the madness part right. What your method is, I have no idea, because the method never comes to fruition.
Yeah. That's the frustrating thing in covering them, is it's just one thing after another with that. And they're so good at convincing their alums, their big donors, so many people that they're right about it. And I think really what's happened, you talk about the last 5 years being miserable. What has happened, I think the AD search cracked the dam wide open on this whole thing. And people just got to a point where they were sick of hearing the rationale, the logic, whatever. And people were just done. Because for the way that works, it took me about 17 years to figure out how it really worked over there. And it's always, well, never mind this disaster that just happened. Things have changed. Like, I remember I got a call in the fall of 2018 from somebody sort of very, very involved in things over there saying, hey, just going to let you know, things are about to really change over here, and it's time folks can really get excited because this is a new era. And here we are, January the 2nd, 2023, and what's really changed?
Well, nothing yet. I still hold out hope,
but it's always this is still to come part, and people have just hit a point where they're done with it. I mean, and you can look at the attendance of games and see it for yourself.
Yeah, I was getting ready to say and it shows in attendance when you have the amount of people that were at women's games now at men's games, and the amount of people that are at women's games that. I mean, I go to DCA ball games over here, and they have as many as the women have. So, and then we all know the football situation. Even in decent times, when you're a 6-6 team, the support isn't there all the time. So it has hit rock bottom, I would think. Although if this basketball season, if we wind up only winning 2 or 3 conference games, and this basketball season goes downhill, it'll get even worse over at Memorial this year. It'll be a ghost town, I think.
I had a first happen the other night. I went and covered the Southeastern Louisiana game, and they played pretty well, actually, although Sela's awful.
Yeah.
But I was the only guy in the press conference, Luke. 20 years we've done this. I've covered plenty of baseball game like that. That's not unusual. But to cover a football or basketball game and be the only guy in attendance, that was a first. The only media guy.
And that's there again. That just tells you that the Vanderbilt has done such a poor job, and I'm not blaming any individual here, but Vanderbilt has done such a poor job of cultivating the Nashville people, the Middle Tennessee folks. It's like they've given up on trying to create a new fan base, and I don't know whether what they think matters anymore. I don't know that they care, and that's what bothers me. I know Daniel does. And again, I just keep holding out hope. Daniel Dearmeyer is the great savior of the program, I think. I think if he happens to walk, then it's going to get even worse, if you can believe that.
No, I completely believe it. What do you think the AD looks like a year from now? And then maybe 5, 10, 20? That's a tough question. But like even a year from now, I'm very interested to see what this looks like.
Well, we all know this, Chris, and it's true for anybody in any place. If you start winning, people come back. It's that simple. They say they won't, they say they don't. But if you start winning, they'll be back. That's the first thing. I don't think there's any way you can tell a year from now. If I'd say 5 years from now, if Daniel Dearmeyer is still our chancellor 5 years from now, I'd say it's better. How much better? I don't know. Chris, I could. And when we're talking about the last 20 years here, I can remember when we never thought about we'd ever win a national championship in anything. And since 2002, we've won, 5 national championships in sports. I never thought that would happen in anything we competed in, because I always felt like Vanderbilt, when I worked there, and much as I loved the place and loved those kids, I always felt like a lot of the people I worked with were just happy to be there and happy to be in the conference and glad we can participate in the Southeastern Conference. Forget trying to win championships and win games. We're just glad to be there. And so I was not sure we'd ever win a national championship, whether it was bowling, tennis, or baseball. I never thought we'd win in any of them, especially baseball. When you look back at the way baseball was when I first started at Vanderbilt, oh my goodness.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you had a set of bleachers, and I remember helping Tony Neely and working from a folding table. That was our press box. I mean, there was zero support for it.
Yeah, it's been such a crazy ride.
And Chris, let me point this out while I've got my notes pulled up here. As I look from 2002, we've been to 6 bowls. Well, we were the previous years, all the years before that, we were only in 3 other bowls. So I know there's more bowls now, but still, we've been to 6 bowls. We've been to 8 NCAA basketball tournaments, 5 NITs. The women's program went to 13 NCAA tournaments and 1 NIT. Baseball, 17 NCAAs, 4 World Series. So the success was there. It's just the last 5 years has washed all that away.
Well, and I think the thing that's done it, partly it's been the winning in pockets, right?
Right.
You know it's possible, and then the school goes away from everything it did to win in a lot of ways. And B, I think the excuses have been blown. Like when I was reporting on stuff around 2020, you could sort of hear the panic in people's voices over there when I would get angry phone calls about the stuff that I was reporting on. It was like somebody's finally pulled the curtain back and nobody knows what to do. And the scramble to control the message and, to tell you black was white and up was down and stuff that you knew was just ludicrous. I think it was the first time that anybody had kind of figured out how it worked, which, like I said, it took me a long time to figure it out. And somebody had sort of explained it to me as a shell game, which I think in a short explanation, that's as good as I've got. But I think it's that. Like, they used to be able to control the message and talk about winning with integrity and we're better in this and that. And, you can always just sort of gloss over the rough patches with the, speaking in a calm NPR voice and not being alarmist and, and you could sort of massage the message and, well, we made a mistake there, but we're going to do better going forward. But when you sort of find out how it works, how the decisions are made and all those sorts of things, I think that's when, because I used to wonder, like, why do people just walk away? Like 3 or 4 years ago, I used to be like, well, it seems like there's hope now and there's this that's different, there's that's different. And then what you find out is, as a journalist, you're just finding out stuff that the people that are walking away knew 5, 10, 15 years ago. And they were able to keep a lid on it and control the message that long until recently. And I think, to me, that is sort of why it's perceived differently. Well,
and I'm speaking here personally. And I think you're right. First of all, your reference to the shell game, I call it the old Hoboken hustle. That's what they've always done for you. Hang in there. This is not a big deal. There's a method to our madness. Okay. But I can tell you from a personal standpoint that after being there, as long as I was there, I felt like the people that came in behind me that had only been there a couple of years or maybe had been there a while, but weren't in a position of authority, they didn't like that. They didn't like the fact that you knew too much. Like that, I think probably because
not at all.
Yeah, that's what it was.
Well, and that's when things started to change. When the people who had dealt with it face to face started to come to me to say, "Hey, look, this is how the sausage gets made and how it goes down." And when the school sensed that I had figured that out, that's when everything changed. Like, I'd never been their favorite person.
Right.
I've had stories of stuff that I just thought they're just silly and petty. Like, I had a photographer one time that was having some trouble with something. And somebody with the baseball team finally pulled him aside and said, "Hey, look, the reason you're having issues is because you're with Chris." And that's been probably 10 or 12 years ago. And I was like, what am I? I'm like one of the few guys here covering you. I've not said a lot out of line. Now, that they were not real happy with me over some of the Kevin Stallings stuff that I reported, which was totally true. But they don't like that. And I get that, right? There's tension between any reporter and any school that you cover.
Sure.
And the second thing was when I was doing the radio stuff, the post-game radio show that we did for a couple years, which was pretty popular, and they were actually winning at the time too. Well, they won one of the years. They did not win. That was Mason's first year. That was another story. I mean, I remember that was a whole different deal. But when I tried to get the whole thing set up, I'm like, Vanderbilt was winning. People were excited. People were going to games. Even Franklin, who couldn't stand me, was really happy we were doing the post-game show and supportive of that. And, I don't think the school wanted it to happen. I had a sponsorship that the school sort of blocked. that cost me a lot of money. And I'm like, why? And it just, I never could figure out, like, what is it that they're so threatened over?
Well, they just want to control the narrative. I think everybody does, but at Vanderbilt more so because they're not confident. There's not a confidence in anything they do or has been. I don't want to speak like I'm speaking right now because, again, I keep going back to Dearmeyer, but I think he's trying to change things. So I just know for a fact when I was there, I was lied to by administrative people, who some of which are still there. I was told things to my face, and then something different happened behind my back. So, and a lot of it had to do with, I had always wanted to be on the Hall of Fame committee because I felt like I brought something to where I could, I knew a lot of past players in every sport, and I knew who was good and who wasn't. And there were a lot of people that were on the committee that didn't know anything about who, they wouldn't have known Whit Taylor if he walked through the door. So, and I'm thinking, well, why have I never been on the committee? And then I had one person confide in me and say, Luke, you know too much. I said, yeah, okay. But why is that?
It's the same problem Will Purdue runs into.
Yeah, no, exactly. I was getting ready to say the same thing. I don't want to speak for Will, but I know that's what Will is running to. I know it is. You're right.
Well, I know for a fact because well, I'll just leave it at that without going any further. But yes, that is 100% the reason why. They don't want any part of somebody like Will or you.
Yeah, and that's just sad to me. Lucy Jones, who is one of the greatest employees ever been in that building, she's finally getting into the Hall of Fame this year, which is wonderful. I think she gets inducted next month. I don't know how she's getting in because Lucy's always been an honest, forthright woman who I love to death. And she and I are a lot alike. We would call it the way it was. And I think we learned that because we learned that under Roy Kramer. Roy Kramer was one of later on I think we'll talk about this, but Roy Kramer was one of the highlights of my being at Vanderbilt. He was a hard man to work for at times, but you knew where you stood. He was honest, and he was also honest about the situations with our coaches. He let them know if you don't win more games, you're going to be out of here. He let them know beforehand. There wasn't none of this. Well, what can I do to make you? That's the one that killed me. What can I do to make you better? When they tell you that means look out. They're getting ready to fire you.
Yeah.
And Roy was very honest, and Lucy learned under him. I learned a whole lot about athletics under Roy Kramer. And to be honest, we ain't had anybody there since that can touch him.
Well, and I think people have asked me at times, like when I was reporting on some of the stuff in 2020, I'd have people email or text me and just tell me to back off and why you're doing this. And you just need to learn to play nice and ignore things. And I mean, I literally got those kind of messages. And I'm just thinking, it took me this long to figure out how it works. And I respect the people who have fought the battles and stuff like that and wanted to win. I knew that it was going to come at a cost to me, and man, did it ever.
Yeah.
The whole story on that, and there's a lot that I've never gotten into on the podcast that I'm just not going to today. But I just thought, I've come this far, and it's like if I don't tell the story of how this works, nobody's ever going to do it. And I felt like I owed it too much to the coaches and the athletes and the people that I covered to just let that go without a whimper. And a lot of the fan base didn't agree with that. And like I said, I would not go over and do that again. I'm not saying I regret doing it because I think it needed to be said, but it really just, it caused me so many issues.
It took a toll. It took a toll.
Well, it took a toll on everything. When you sit at the table with your family and you're trying to process, well, what do I do with this thing that I got today? And your kids and your wife are talking to you, and you're kind of checked out, and the bank account's dwindling and that stuff. I mean, it went like I said, when you want to know, like, would I sign up to do this all over again? I don't know that I would. because just the cost to somebody who does that, it's not worth it personally. And to me, I thought that I owed it to a lot of people to come out with it, but that's why nobody does, because the guy that does it, your life becomes so miserable that you wouldn't think of doing it again.
You're right. And, Chris, whenever I came forward with some things to you on the very first podcast I did with you, I got some people, most of the people were happy that I did or were fine that I did what I did, and they appreciated my honesty. I had a few people say it was sour grapes. I got news for you. You don't work somewhere for 40 years and then all of a sudden have sour grapes. I worked for 11 different football coaches. I worked for, I forget how many athletic directors and football operations. There was only one person in that department at the time that I said I can't work with them. That was it out of all those people. So who do you think the problem is? You talk about somebody who's been there 40 years and they say, well, you've been there too long. That would be the case if I didn't care anymore. Absolutely, I would agree with that. And I think that does happen sometimes. You wear out your welcome, so to speak. But I was not in that category. And I'm still not. If you go to a Vanderbilt football or basketball game, I'm at most of them. I'm at just about every football game and 90% of the basketball games. And I'm at almost 100% of the baseball games. And I don't work there anymore. I don't have any reason to be there. I don't get a paycheck from there. But when I worked there, people didn't like it because I would say, why didn't you go to the game last night? Well, I work here all day. I don't want to go to the game. Well, you're getting paid by Vanderbilt, and you're going to give your tickets to a Kentucky fan or a Alabama fan. That's the kind of people in the department I had a problem with. And when I would call them out, they'd get mad at me. But if you don't have support, think about it. You think an Alabama employee of the athletic department is going to last if he sells his tickets to Auburn fans for the Iron Bowl? No, they'd fire him the next day. That's the kind of crap that at Vanderbilt you had to put up with because no one really cared. Vanderbilt's the only athletic department you can go into and you would see other universities being supported in their windshields with stickers or license plates. I'm like, we got Florida people here. And I understand people go to college and they're undergrads at Florida and then they come work at Vanderbilt. I get that. But when you're getting your paycheck from that place, in my opinion, you should be supportive 100% of what you're doing. It doesn't make sense for you all of a sudden, and I guess it's okay for me to say this, you can blank it out if you need to. It'd be like you throwing your support for Anchor of Gold. I mean, Does that make sense? Sure. So that's the kind of atmosphere I was in for a lot of my time at Vanderbilt. And it was so frustrating because I lived and died with those kids and cared about the football, basketball, baseball teams, even all the other sports. The swimming team, I'd be upset because Jeremy Organ wasn't getting what he needed budget-wise.
I think the problem is at some point you go like, why do I care more than the the school itself?
Yeah, exactly.
But it's harder than that because you're dealing with kids who have worked their whole life for scholarships. They had hopes and dreams too, and it's like the same thing. I guess it's why that I've done this. Like if I had done this at Georgia or Alabama or somewhere like that for the same amount of work, I'm not kidding you, I would have probably made 10 times the money for the same amount of work. But the reason I started it in the first place is like the coverage for them is garbage. And I felt like, okay, for the stand sitting in the seat, put the part of doing this aside. I always wanted to try to do something that was as much as I could help it, gave that guy something comparable to what you'd get if you were a fan of another team. Now, there's only so far you can go,
right?
When you're the only full-time guide. There's never been a time where I only did the site, right? I always had a full-time job or a part-time job, and that's still the case to this day. But that was kind of my why. I was just like, well, doesn't it suck enough following the program to have to endure crap coverage too? But it just becomes so difficult to do it. after time. I mean, not just the money in and the time in, but it's the other stuff too.
You know, Chris, and this just hit me while you were saying this, and you're so spot on about this. At some point, I don't know if they agree to come on with you, or maybe you could go on with them in their venues, but people like who have covered Vanderbilt in the past, Greg Pogue, Mark McGee, Larry Woody, people like that have been beat writers at Vanderbilt. I can't think of them all right now, but there's been a bunch of them. I would love to hear what they think and how they were treated and exactly what they knew. You know, Joe Biddle was there a lot. And I love Joe, but rest his soul. But, you know, Joe was a sarcastic and that type of thing.
Yeah.
He had a lot of Paul Kaharski in him. But Vanderbilt needed that. And I always told him, I said, I appreciate you saying the truth. Sometimes I get mad that if he would poke at a player for an inability or something, I didn't like that much. But it's okay to go after the people that are getting paychecks over there. Heck, go after me if I'm doing a poor job fitting helmets, whatever it be. I'm fine with that. Don't go after the kids so much. And, you know, I'd be interested to hear what those people's experiences were like.
Well, and I want to be clear, I don't hold a grudge against anybody over there right now. I actually get along with people pretty well, but it's a job. You have criticism to offer. And
yeah.
Good goodness, there's, I mean, it's just, you can't wake up without something being right in front of you. And I've learned just some days I just bite my tongue, because what else are you going to do at some point?
Well, you have to pick your battles because there's too many of them.
Right.
You know, Chris, go ahead.
No, you first.
Well, I guess, again, back to Diermeyer. I have heard so much positive about Daniel Diermeyer and how much he takes time. I've heard some good things about his relationship with the commissioner of the conference. I've heard, you know, that he understands Vanderbilt's plight, but he wants Vanderbilt in this league. That he, even though a lot of people think Vanderbilt should not be in the SEC, he values a Vanderbilt for a lot of reasons. And I just feel like this worm, as large as this worm is, can be turned. But do we have the people in place? And I'm talking, when I say that, I said, do we have enough on board of trust? Do we have enough people in the athletic department that want to get this done? It's harder to win than it is to lose. Everybody knows that. Anybody can just go over there and lose. We've seen that. And one of my former managers wrote a book, and I wish I could find I think the man's deceased now. He was actually a volunteer assistant. And he wrote a book that said, "So you say you want to win." He wrote it during the Jerry DiNardo era of football, because Jerry was changing the culture big time. And some good, some bad, may I add. But at the same time, he was trying his very best, his level best, and he held it kind of like James Franklin. He held everybody accountable. You worked your butt off or you weren't there. The message was the same for everybody, what Clark is trying to do right now. And when that happens at Vanderbilt, you can't find people. They don't want to be around because they're like, oh, gosh, this is going to cause me more work. And that's what it was. It literally was. Oh, gosh, I'd rather lose and just have stay in my comfort zone than to get out of my comfort zone and make this place better.
And look, I've worked in higher ed at a couple places where I saw that. Higher ed is a great breeding ground for mediocrity. And I've nothing against education. I got 2 degrees. You know, I worked in it for a long time. I'm not anti-education, but what you see,
right.
And it makes it so easy to recognize at a place like Vanderbilt. I've been in those meetings. I've seen how people cover stuff up. I've seen how when you're not good at your job, you just form a coalition with other people who aren't good, and you just kind of have a tacit agreement that you're going to stick by each other's backs. If anybody's trying to achieve, you're going to go after that person. You want to keep your comfort zone. You want to keep your check. And you want to have the comfort level for not really doing anything, and achievement never comes into it. And I have seen that situation multiple times in places that I've worked, and it makes it easy to spot when you're on the outside looking in.
You're right. You're dead on. And you know, the one thing I got called on the carpet for it one time. There was a staff meeting I was in. I'm not sure what it was about. I think it was a logo meeting, believe it or not, back when we were changing our logo for the 100th time. Or changing a color even. And I remember Jim Foster was working here because I spoke up, and Jim's the only one that really backed me on it. But I made the comment, I said, in the meeting in front of 20 other people, about why are we running away from our responsibilities? You know, our motto or our message, our statement, our what's it called? Mission statement. Our mission statement talked about giving the student athlete its best experience. How can we do that when we don't give them the best experience of winning? Because winning goes along with having the best experience, in my opinion. And Jim Foster's the only one that stood up and basically said, Luke, you're 100% correct. Of course, now he was winning, and it was easy for him to say at the time, but at that time, all the other sports weren't. And that's the thing. It's not a good experience for these kids. You're selling them short, and you're doing a disservice to these kids if you don't give them the best chance to win. And that's the biggest problem over there. They haven't given them the best chance to win.
Well, to tie up one other loose end, this season of the VandySports podcast has been made possible by my friend Dr. Jody Jones, DDS. When it comes to general or cosmetic dentistry services, Jody is the best in Nashville. Just check out his client list. It testifies to that. He sees movie stars, music stars, athletes, coaches, you name it. Jody is the dentist of choice for stars in Nashville, but he sees regular folks like you and I as well. What people love about Jody's office is the ambiance. It's relaxing. It's friendly. Someone described it to me as a tooth spa. Whether your needs are general or cosmetic, go see Jody today. Call him 615-270-2322. See him at 55 Music Square East, not far from downtown or the Vanderbilt campus. Jody is a former Vanderbilt football player and a huge Commodore booster, so go and talk VandySports with him while you're there. Go see Jody Jones today. Thank him for his support of this podcast, because without it, this season would not be possible. I grew up here, and you'd see people in the media go after them and on the radio, and you just think, they're just being picked on. These people don't know what they're talking about. And you would hear stuff like, well, they just don't want to win. But it's always repeated, and nobody ever gave you any specifics, and for me, that's not good enough. That's just repeat something loud enough and like the truth is right in front of you, right? But you were always convinced that it was this, or other guys cheated, or just this happened, or hit a bad spell, and and next thing you know, you're rationalizing decades of losing, and nobody could ever put a finger on why and how and who. And I think that was part of my motivation too. Was to me, just because you say they don't care, that's not good enough. I want to know what happens and why. And to me, if I accomplish anything in the last 2 or 3 years, again, would I go back and like I said, I don't even know if I would do this whole thing over again if I had the choice, given how hard it was. But I kind of felt like if you've come that far, you owe it to people to tell the story, other than just take my word for it, they don't care.
And I think in my first podcast, if you go back and listen, I said a lot. I exposed a lot of the things that went on when I was there, and that's why you didn't win. And you exposed a ton of it, of why they didn't win. I'm not over there now. I just know individuals now, and I know darn well Clark Lee will do everything he can to win within the rules. I don't know Jerry Stackhouse well enough to know if that's the case in men's basketball. I think Shay Ralph was a great hire in women's basketball. She can't keep anybody healthy for whatever reason. I think they have 7 or 8 players now that can play, and that's it. There's reason, and of course we all just look at the Tim Corbin model of what he's done. It's amazing what he's done. And I guess, Chris, I always like to ask you a question during these. Why has Tim been so successful, in your opinion?
Well, I think you probably, I don't know that I'll add anything that you want. I think, one, he separated himself from a lot of the nonsense. He's become, it's like nuclear war, right? Nobody wants to set off the bomb and upset the other side. So Tim's not going to come out and criticize the school publicly, ever. The only time he's ever done it was over the COVID thing. And even then it was, he kept his words at a minimum. They don't want to lose Tim because the moment they tick Tim off and he leaves, everybody's gone. It'll be turn the last person out, turn off the light, which is almost where it is anyway.
Right.
I think Tim is smart. Tim works hard. Tim dislikes losing more than anybody I've ever been around. I think Tim puts so much time into pursuing excellence, into asking questions, into looking at things differently. Maybe I've been doing this 20 years, but maybe I can make a tweak here or there. Tim asks people questions. Tim makes friends with successful people. Tim's always trying to understand. I think that's what makes Tim tick. And it's just the opposite of everything he's around over there.
And I know we always talk about football, baseball, and basketball, and that's it. But there's been some other people over there that have done the same thing, not to the level that Tim has. But we talked about this a little bit the other day. John Williamson in bowling, the golf program, especially the men's program, women's tennis has been Jeff McDonald. I've said it before. To me, after Tim Corbin's statue, Jeff McDonald deserves a statue. If you know how hard that guy worked and what a great job he did with those kids, and I saw it firsthand, had a lot of conversations with Jeff. If you ever get to know Jeff, take the time. If you ever run into him, take the time to have a conversation with him. You'd think you're talking to Tim Corbin's brother. It's amazing. But there's been some folks that have done it, just like what Scott Limbaugh's doing with the golf program. But because we focus on the other ones and we see how hard it is to win, and it's harder to win in those because the spotlight's on you, for one thing. But until until Dearmeyer gets everything in place, and it's going to take some more movement over there, in my opinion. There's got to be some more movement in that athletic department. I'm not going to name names. We probably all know who they are. But you've got to have people that work just as hard as a Tim Corbin that are in your administration.
There's a little bit of a sentiment. I'll share with you a text I got after the podcast that
Okay.
time might be running out on some of this.
Okay.
That the revenues have just dropped too low and it's become too embarrassing. And I'm just curious what that would look like.
Well, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, I don't know. How do you sell advertising? I mean,
I don't know. I don't know how you sell any of this.
I don't. Because no one's seeing your product.
Yeah.
I mean, and I'm not picking on women's basketball, Shea Ralph, but the last 5 years we have in women's basketball, we went from what was the second best probably program in the SEC in women's basketball at one time behind Tennessee to either the 13th or 14th program year in, year out for the last 7 or 8 years. Men's basketball used to be in the upper division just about every year. Stallings had a couple of bad years during his 72-year stretch, but most of the time he was right around the 500 mark. Now, if you win 5 or 6 conference games,
oh yeah. Look, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, Kevin got fired for going to the NCAA tournament. That now is a party and a 10-year contract extension.
I don't understand it. I'm as hopeful, and I'll be in the gym Tuesday night cheering my butt off that we beat South Carolina, and I'm as hopeful as anybody that we turn this thing around during conference play. But I've never seen a team in their 4th year that treated the non-conference schedule like an exhibition schedule.
Yeah.
And to me, that's what it was treated like. It doesn't matter. We're just figuring out who we're going to play in our rotations and all.
That's because of the expectations around you. It's the culture. And it's why Tim got his operation out of that building and behind the left field wall.
There you go. And that's why I hope, and I'm not hoping against hope, I think it's going to happen. Clark is doing everything he can in his area to keep it separate from any other ancillary crap that may still go on over there. I'm hoping it doesn't, but he's got to protect that football program because I know how much he loves it and how much he wants it to succeed.
Well, I would just like to see a decade of what can they become if they cut the nonsense. And there's nobody out there that's listening to this podcast that's ever seen that, not even a decade, probably not even a year.
No. Yeah, I don't know. It's I guess it's the frustration level and the sadness I have when I walk into. I'm gonna go back to Memorial Gym because football's always had its problems, and it's gonna always because it's the toughest. Well, let's be honest. How many private schools have had? You know, that's why I'm so excited for TCU. Not that we're TCU, but you know what I'm saying. They have a similar size stadium. Last year they were 5-7. Now I know they went transfer portal and got a lot better. They have 7 or 8 starters on defense that's transfers, but so that's different. But at the same time, it just holds out hope for Vanderbilt to at least be in the conversation to be a top 25, top 35 football program, and that's winning 7 games.
Luke, and if you make a good run at it and you do smart stuff one after another and it doesn't work, nobody's going to criticize you, right?
No.
It's just they've got so much stacked up against them. And I think it's getting worse. I think it's even getting worse in baseball. I don't want us to get into details here, but you and I know, 5 years ago it was you don't even call somebody else's commitment. Now it is equipment tampering. It is tamper with players on other people's rosters while they're playing for other teams in your league. It's no holds barred now, and maybe it was just a one-off, but maybe it's also not coincidence that's the first time they have finished under 500 in the league last year in what, a decade now. I just think that there's already so much going against you that you can't afford to be weighted down by an extra ounce of unnecessary weight. And that's why this has gotten so bad.
I agree. And again, if you look at when you look at the things that have been accomplished over there, you almost are amazed at how did they do that? How did James Franklin win 9 games 2 years in a row?
I know. And that's crazy. I mean, but you know the answer to that too. James, but because David wanted James to succeed, and David was really James didn't have to deal with some of the nonsense, not all, but a lot of that stuff that everybody else had to deal with. I think David ran interference for him for his entire tenure until James did himself in, which was also entirely predictable.
Well, it was one of those things where it was a sugar rush. Yeah, I knew when James was there that we were going to win because just how hard and how detailed he was. Very similar to Tim Corbin. Again, why was one of the reasons James Franklin was so successful was he got everybody in that building out of their comfort zone. I would watch people. I literally saw this when James first got there. He and I were pretty tight. He leaned on me because he knew I'd been there a while, and he was wanting to know some of the pitfalls and what some of the corrections that need to be made that affected football. So we had a lot of long conversations. I remember going on vacation with my wife to Las Vegas, and I'm sitting there trying to win games of poker, and I can't get off the phone because Franklin's wearing me out, calling me, asking me question after question. I mean, it's just who he was. He would call you at 10 o'clock at night if something hit him. He wouldn't wait till the next morning. He'd call you at 10 and ask you what was going on. But I remember walking down the hallway, the old corridor, and you've been in Magoogan, up top. When you get to that end of the corridor after you go past the meeting rooms and you got that long hallway, then you get into the other end of the building where the administrative office are and the other sports coaches. People would turn and go the other way when they saw James.
Yeah.
Because James would do this.
Some of that was probably fair because those guys, those people didn't get paid enough to pick up the phone at 10 at night, some of them. So some of that I do think was fair, which was really more on Vanderbilt than it was on than it was on James.
I agree.
I mean, it was like the collision of two things that it's like when you try to stick two of the same end of a magnet together.
Yeah. I know what you're saying, but my point is, James and Tim are very similar, and if they're good friends, or have been. I guess they still are. Even though they're different people, they're still good friends. But they were both psych majors, which I find interesting. So James would tell me, Luke, why are our ushers in these color shirts? Why are our band members in the wrong color shirts? And I'd say, I don't know. It's just how it's always been. And that's the one thing he would go nuts about. We're changing that.
Luke, let me cut you off. I went to a basketball game. I covered the game the other night. The ushers were still wearing what looked like the 1984-ish, right? I guess it would have been after that, like the early 90s. I don't know how many shades of gold ago that was and how many logos ago, but it literally looked like they were still recycling the same uniforms from the 80s or the 90s.
I mean, we're literally now. Let me give you this one. We're at the spring game, his first spring game, and Jamal Griffin and Michael Hazel were kind of his two people that he always. They had their pads and pencils out, and sometimes their phones, and they're putting in there whatever he would tell them that he wanted to correct it or looked into. And he's looking around the stadium, and he goes, "Why do we set them over here? That needs to change. Where are our recruits on game day? That needs to change. Why do they sit over here?" He's doing that while he's also watching his team participate in the spring game. That's just who he was. He's a multitasker.
Yeah.
He was OCD. Hey, listen, I'll never forget this. This is a story. Maybe I'm rambling too much, but I think people will enjoy hearing this. When the team will get there on Friday, sometimes you do a Friday walkthrough, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you just come to the stadium. The kids go to the locker room, familiarize themselves with the locker room, and then get back on the bus and head to the hotel, depending on where you're playing, how far the trip was. We're at Florida. He's walking around because we're not going to get undressed. We're just going to hop back on the bus. And he's looking at the lockers that we've set up. And, if you know anything about it, setting up a locker room, you're very meticulous, and everything you do, everything's perfect. Well, one of my kids forgot to put a lace in a shoe. Franklin walked over and took the lace and put it inside the shoe. That's how much he noticed.
Yeah.
How much detail that man had. And it's going to take that. I'm not saying you have to be James Franklin, by no means. But it takes that at Vanderbilt in the administration. That's where we don't get it, is the day-to-day people that make, like you said, that make the hamburger. The people that work there daily and that can influence the well-being of those student athletes, those type of people we need there. Not the ones that sit there and stare at their computer and wait for the 8 hours to pass and walk out the door.
Yeah, I think, now that I think about it, James and Vanderbilt were the most polar opposite marriage ever.
Ever.
And the more I think about it, it is astonishing to me that Tim Corbin's still at Vanderbilt. And by the way, I give Vanderbilt some credit for that. This isn't going to be just a sit here and we take shots at him all day.
No.
But and let me also clear one thing up too. I hope they get this right. I do. I still see so much of the same stuff that I just go, how does this ever get better?
The reason why I'll take criticism all day from anybody is because I do care, and I still care. I'm a 61-year-old man that's been away from there now for 4 years, but I still have a lot of friends in that athletic department and a lot of people who I even know some people or two people on the board of trust. So I'm still connected, but I'm not there on a daily basis. And I'm even more, I even more want this place to get turned around because I know the good of the place. For the biggest majority, they're great, wide-eyed, wonderful kids who want to do the right thing. And they deserve better. They deserve better. I don't care. And you can start, it's a new year. So hopefully come this morning when they went into work or next Monday, whenever things kick back off, whatever it is, everybody in that department will hear this podcast and say, well, you know what? I'm going to look myself in the mirror and say, Luke's right. I'm here getting a paycheck. I really care whether Kentucky wins in basketball rather than Vanderbilt men's basketball. And I really care more about Alabama football than I do Vanderbilt football. And I should probably not work here and get a paycheck, or at least support these kids and do the best job I can while I'm here.
Well, the next phone call you get that says you were right and we were wrong about that, well, if your experience is anything like mine, then it'll be your first.
Well,
and the fans are that way too, man. I've gotten so much blowback from fans, and I mean, you do get, now to be fair, I've gotten a lot of people send me messages and say nice things and texts and say, hey, thanks for what you've done and everything, and those do mean a lot. But I think part of the problem, they've still got a lot of people that enable it.
There's no question.
Those are the same people that'll criticize you for being the critic, and those people that they never come back and say, you were right and we were wrong. That's just that the whole thing is like a big cult.
Well, and I know for a fact that there's 3 or 4 people that have been critical of me that feel the same way I do.
Oh, hey, Luke, let me stop you there. The worst, this is how strong it is. The worst is when people will tell you one thing in private and they'll go in print and contradict it. That drives me bananas because you can't do anything.
No.
They'll tell you something off the record privately, and then when it all hits the fan, Vanderbilt knows exactly where to go to get somebody to write a puff piece. And, and then you just, well, see, you don't know what you're talking about. That's how the whole thing stays alive.
Well, and let me say this, Chris. I'm not sitting here saying we can be Alabama in football, we can be Kentucky in basketball. But I am saying this. If Tim Corbin can go to 5 college World Series and win 2 of them and play for 4 of them, then we can do better in basketball and football and other sports than we are. And it's not just coaching that causes that. It's decision making. It's
culture. It goes way back to stuff that probably before some of the people in charge over there were even alive. It's a culture. That's the thing that I learned. It's not a person. I mean, sometimes it is, and of course there are people behind. It's a culture that goes back so far. They don't know any other way to operate, and they can't admit that it's failed, or they just don't care in most cases.
But let me ask you this, Chris, and I'm talking about when I first started working at Vanderbilt, there was maybe 70 people in the department. I don't know what the exact number was, and there's over 200 now that work there. Okay, we still have the same amount of sports. I'll say that we're adding volleyball, so basically the same amount of sports. We still have the same size football stadium. We have the same size gym. We do have a bigger baseball stadium, but we've got 3 times the amount of people it takes to run it. And to me, that creates apathy, in my opinion, because what you have is a lot of people over there that are just dead wood. And I'm not talking about them as a person. They're probably great,
man. That's how it works. That is how it works.
But does it work that way at Alabama? If you again, I'm just using Alabama as a reference.
No, of course not. Of course it doesn't. I mean, in some pockets it does, but that's higher ed for you, and that's why they've got to get. This is going to sound awful. They've got to get the higher ed out of the AD.
They do. Any AD, not just Candace, whoever the AD is.
And I'm not pointing to a person. I'm pointing to a culture. I know athletic department is in the department and the culture that's there. I mean, it's just so easy to see if you've been in it and worked in it.
Yeah. It is. But please let everyone know. Everyone, please understand where I'm coming from. Yeah, I've been critical, and today it's kind of concentrated on the last 20 years, where the last 5 of it has been unacceptable. You can say whatever you want, use any excuse you want. You can use COVID, you can use whatever. The last 5 years of Vanderbilt athletics has been unacceptable for 90% of it.
Yeah.
And people don't agree with that. Well, they do agree with that because it shows in the numbers of who's showing up.
Oh, hey, look, it shows in my numbers too.
Sure it does.
And I got so sick of it. And I'll give you credit that the podcast is only alive because you got Jody Jones to help me out.
And Jody's one of those people that cares still.
I know, and it's a miracle any of them are left. I was folding the podcast unless Jody had stepped up to help. I almost did it again this spring right before surgery. I was just so exhausted physically.
Sure.
In addition to everything else, I actually called a sponsor and said, I'm just giving you a heads up. I plan on shuttering this thing. I might do a finale episode or two, just to put a bow on it and let people know, but I'm not planning on coming back. And I think just having too much to rest and knowing that it's still, I really do think the times the people that sent me the nice notes and stuff,
yeah,
that's one reason I've kept doing it, because it does mean something to people, even though it's gotten harder to do. Gosh, it just has been so little good stuff to talk about, and that's what made last year hard. It was like you could always count on baseball to be that thing that you could have something that energized people to talk about, and when that went south, it's like, oh boy, what do I do now? But
it did. But think about this: we say baseball went south. They still made the NCAA's. They still were one game away from getting to a super. That's a good thing. What you just said. Think about what you just said. If we could get football in a bowl game and basketball to an NCAA tournament, how much better we'd feel.
Well, I want to circle back to when this started. Okay.
Yeah.
Because 20 years ago, and I'll get into the background. I've got 2 other podcasts about this plan, and I want to hit specific things with specific people. I want to ask you about this.
Sure.
The AD was at a pretty substantial low about the time they restructured. And then within 3 or 4 years, everybody started winning. Kevin Stallings got it turned around. Bobby Johnson had the team beating Tennessee in 2005, got to that one bowl game. Tim started, getting to NCAA tournaments. It took him a while to win that first. Well, it didn't take him a while. It took him a year or 2 to win that first regional, but it took him a while to get to Omaha. But he was building something. They were getting the NCAA tournaments, whereas they weren't getting out of last place in the league before that. Stuff started to happen not long after the restructuring. I don't know if that was coincidental or what, but tell me what was going on there back when we were first getting the site started, to where that was in a bad spot. But within a few years, that had completely started to turn.
Well, again, one of the questions in the mailbag was good hires, and I mentioned Roy Kramer. The other one was Gordon Gee. I was a Gordon Gee fan. Let me just say that. David Williams under Gordon Gee, in my opinion, was a better version of David Williams, if that makes sense to you.
Completely. Yeah.
And I think if Gordon Gee would have stayed, we may not be where we are right now. I think we would be in better shape culture-wise. Gordon was a guy who, and I'll give this example. I may have given this before, but this is one of the reasons why I think the question you're asking was this way. He came, me just being a little old equipment manager, he came to me one day, and he used to deliver bow tie cookies around the athletic department because he wears bow ties. So he would walk around, and it was just being a PR guy. He's walking around, shaking hands, but how you doing? How you doing? And he would ask the lady. There was a lady that was always with him. He'd always make sure, now what's his name? I want to make sure I got his name so I can call him by name when I walk in his office. Luke, right? You're Luke. I said, yes, Chancellor Gee. Now, Luke, and he put his arm around you. And he said to me, Luke, give me one thing, give me on a wish list, not necessarily football, just any sport here. Give me something that needs to be done. I want to know. And he said, no matter how small, how large. I said, okay. I said, our tennis program doesn't have the money left in the budget, excuse me, for a Jugs tennis machine that, shoots the balls automatically. Theirs are broke or whatever. They don't have any money left in their budget. It was July or August. The very next week, it gets delivered for me to take over to tennis. That's all I had to do was say that to him. And I'm sure he did that to everybody he went to. So that's the reason why, because he cared. I can't tell you after Gordon Gee left when the last time David Williams or Candace came in the equipment room. Never saw him. Now, how are you going to know your pulse when you walk down in football? People that know those kids as good as anybody is the strength coach, the equipment manager, your nutrition folks, and the equipment and the training ring. They know them better than anybody. So that's where you're going to find out things. And they just like, okay, I'd rather not go down there. I don't understand that. Maybe I'm wrong. Tell me I'm wrong. But that's what I saw. And that's why it was getting better and was going to be a lot, I think, if Gordon would have stayed.
It seemed to me that when Zeppos, and this is not me making a conclusion on my own, this is me talking to people that work at the school and stuff like that. It seems to me, and these are my words and not theirs, but you will have perspective on it. It seemed to me like when Zeppos took over, it almost became less of a university and more of a political organization. And somebody made the comment to me, this is a pretty well-heeled alum. I'm going to try to not give away too many details just to not out a particular individual. But it's a person who had been to Vanderbilt and had a son or daughter go to Vanderbilt. This person said to me, I just feel like that school, when I was there and really up until about a decade ago, was just a really fun place to be. And it just seems like it's not that way anymore. And I think a lot of that was on Nick. Fairly or unfairly, that's perception. I want to hear your opinion on that.
I didn't get, and this is a fault of mine, I didn't get to know Nick Zeppos as well as I did Gordon Gee in the short period of time Gordon was there. And I guess it's because when I did meet Nick Zeppos, he was not friendly. He was not outwardly. It was like, okay, I'm looking past you to talk to the next person. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and Gee was definitely not that way. Now, I
No.
sensed a little bit of a politician in that, or maybe a little politician, but at least he tried.
Yeah.
With Nick, I've told this story on the podcast. Nick, when Nick was trying to become the chancellor, the one and only conversation I ever had with Nick Zeppos was Nick sidled up to me at practice and basically started reciting every sports fact he'd ever known. It kind of felt like that. And then he got the chancellor spot. I think Martha Ingram was the person who basically engineered that, from what I understand. And a few years later, when it starts to go bad, and I mean, this is 10 years ago, you had the facility stuff that, well, we're going to do it, then we're not going to do it, then we're going to do it, and that whole shenanigan. And I said, hey, let's just have the chancellor on the radio. Let's get his side. And the response I got was literally, his schedule is booked the entire fall. Sorry. That to me was Nick Zeppos in a nutshell.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't know if you remember this, but we had these, John Rich used to have people out to his farm, and we'd have a barbecue, and usually it was right after two-a-days ended, sometimes right before two-a-days started, and he would bring some of his coaches, strength coach and whatever, and they'd ask questions. Well, Nick Zeppos came with James Franklin, and Franklin got that done. There's another point. What other coach could have gotten a chance to come with him to that? And he stood up there, and you remember hearing about
the
rocket ship.
The
remember he
incident,
said, right, until the incident. But he made the comment, you remember hearing about, if it takes a rocket ship, we're going to do it. We're going to skyrocket to the top of the Southeastern Conference in football. If it takes a rocket ship. And everybody kind of looked around and, what's he talking about? We want to get to a bowl game. We want to be a 7-8 winning team. We're fine. We understand it's difficult to win championships at Vanderbilt in football. We get that. But that's the one and only time I ever saw him do anything that helped and tried to pump up with the fan base or the people outside, the sidewalk fans at Vanderbilt. After James Franklin,
go ahead.
After James Franklin left, I never saw that again in any aspect of not only the athletic directors, anybody ever trying to come out and reach out to what fan base we did have, which back then was substantial for Vanderbilt. It was substantial. And so it's just a deterioration of people not caring.
I want to ask you about the Gillette Hall incident that sort of led to fallout they're probably still dealing with in the AD. The version I got at the time was the reason they discovered that was because there was a burglary ring going around campus, and it was the buddies of a particular scholarship basketball player who were the ones doing it. And they were investigating that, and that's how they found the Vandenberg matter.
That could be. I didn't know that for sure. No, I can't say yes or no on that. But I mean, I know how it all went down, but I don't know that was the reason why they found it out. But irregardless, you shouldn't have, obviously, and that was a sad situation for everybody involved. It was awful.
When did you hear about all that? How did you hear about all that? When did you know that was not going to end well?
Well, I will say this, and I guess you can if you can't put this on the air, just cut it out. Brandon Vandenberg, I was in a staff meeting, and my part was at the beginning, but Coach Franklin would let me stay in if I wanted to stay and just listen in. So it went to recruiting after whatever I had to say and whatever the strength coach had to say. And they started talking about recruiting, and it was about Vandenberg. And Ricky Ronnie was one, I guess, was his main recruiter. And he had made a comment that, James, we can't sign this kid. And James was like, what do you mean? And this is in front of everybody in the staff meeting. And he says, there's been issues out in San Diego. And he would be a great player. He'd probably be an all-SEC tight end, but he's not worth the risk. That was said in the staff meeting. Then the very next week, I guess this was in a April meeting, maybe May. I don't know how the recruiting calendar worked back then. Next thing I know, he's signed a letter of intent. The kid comes to Vanderbilt. What typically happens, Chris, is in June, they all start showing up back then. We give them gear, shoes, workout gear, and all that. He comes in, and myself and Chris, my assistant at the time, he's the only kid that was complaining about what we gave him and that I need 2 pair of these and I need this and that. And I knew right then the kid felt like he was, better than anybody else. Then I have one of our players on the team come in and say, that dude is bad news. This was the next day. And unfortunately, it turned out to be accurate. Within, I think it was less than 2 weeks, he was on campus that this happened in June.
The version circulating at the time, and I'll keep names out of it, was that he got arrested on his official visit, or was about to be arrested for, I think, a fight at the Tin Roof, and one or two of the players on the team somehow were able to talk the cops out of that.
That's absolutely true. And we had a former player, I won't mention his name, who was either managing or working at the Tin Roof at the time.
Yeah.
And
I don't know who that is, but I probably did it once at one time.
And he diffused the situation too. He was a big part of that.
I honestly thought that James was getting railroaded for some stuff that wasn't supporting what I was hearing privately at the time. And the source that I had, or sources, they weren't necessarily connected with Vanderbilt. This was more through the legal end. But, who knows?
Well, when James found out,
I know now, but yeah,
right. When James found out, he was actually in Florida, and David Williams called him. But he was in Florida when this went down, and he immediately flew back.
At that point, you had to know this was all going to be over, didn't you?
You did. The one thing I think it affected, and I don't want to use the word exceptions, but there was this vetting on recruits after that became the most important thing. This kid better be a Boy Scout. You know,
Yeah.
I'm exaggerating a little bit, but you know where I'm going with that. After that happened, it was like, hey, we're not anybody that's a fringe player. We're not going to touch them.
I look back to the time that they had it rolling. That was a fun time when they were winning. And basketball and Memorial was rocking. Baseball was getting going and becoming what it would become. And football was at the point where they were still losing more than they were winning, but just getting, obliterated by anybody and everybody was not a foregone conclusion. Through most of Bobby Johnson's time, well, maybe not most, took him a couple of years, but that just seems like that was 1,000 years ago at this point.
And 2004, Bobby started turning the football around in 2004. I think we may have only won 2 games, but I think we lost to Tennessee in the last game, 38-33. And then in 2005, of course, we beat Tennessee. And then tell me if you've ever seen the stadium any better than when we played Auburn that day.
That was up there. I thought that what would that have been? The 2012 Tennessee game?
Oh, yeah. When none of them showed up because they knew we were going to beat them.
None of them, but it was muted.
There wasn't many there. I can tell you that. There wasn't many there because we won the game 41-18, and the entire fourth quarter, I spent the entire fourth quarter looking around trying to find those guys, the quote Tennessee fans, and it looked like cockroaches leaving that stadium.
Yeah.
So, you're right about that, but I'm just saying, let's just take Tennessee out of it. The Auburn game, the 14-13 win over Auburn, when you had Brent Musburger doing the play-by-play and game day was there, that was the best day. That was one of my top 5 favorite days in Vanderbilt football history. Got to be.
Yeah, and we still go back to the bowl game in Birmingham when just everybody was disappointed by the fact that they didn't get a better bowl. And frankly, and I remember James was furious and pointed the finger at David for not working hard to get them a better bowl. And David said that was nonsense, basically. But I just remember after all that and the difficult year, how many people were there in Birmingham? I was blown away. I was there that day.
Well,
it was not what I'd expected.
The Music City Bowl, it was so cold when Boston College brought absolutely nobody, and we still had 50,000 Vanderbilt fans. That was amazing. But the first bowl we've been to since '82.
I very distinctly remember that one riding up to the escalator to the press box. Yeah. Yeah.
So there's, those good times. It's just and again, these last 5 years have been so tough on everybody involved. Thank goodness for our bowling, tennis, and baseball, because it's been a tough 5 years. And one of the things, and I brought this up on a recent podcast, Chris, one of the mistakes that have been made by whoever makes the decisions, whether it's the chancellor, the board of trustees, or the athletic director, keeping a coach too long is as detrimental as anything you can do. I'm sorry, it is. You brought up a coach at Missouri who turned that place around in 1 year, it looks like. I mean, there's still a lot of games to be played, but you can just tell that the culture of that team, and I know it's tons of transfers and all that. I get that. But it shouldn't take you 4 years, even though it was a 0-18 team that Jerry Stackhouse inherited. It shouldn't take you 4 years to get better, a lot better. And we're not, in my opinion, we're not that way. I hold out hope. I'll be there at every game. But it shouldn't take that long. You can kill your program by hanging on to people too long. We did it in football. We've done it before in basketball. And that's the whole thing. We did it in women's basketball. Look how far that program. You talk about a program that's fallen farther than any of them. That one probably further than men's basketball.
No doubt. Because they were better than men's basketball, and now really, even as bad as the men have been, the women have been worse.
Chris, they went to 13 straight NCAA tournaments, including 2 or 3 Elite Eight.
Was it like 18 of 19, something like that? Like
they
missed one in there somewhere, and then they got right back to it.
Yes. I mean, just, yeah. Yeah.
There was another question there. Oh, I know what it was. Tell me if you agree with this. Whatever their win total is this year in men's basketball, I would set the expectation is about 2/3 of whatever the number is this year for next year. In other words, if they win 12 this year, then I'd pencil in about 8 for next.
I don't agree with that, and I'll tell you why. Because every year's different. I don't know what the non-conference schedule is next year. You know, you could pad that and have a non-conference schedule that was so
That's
weak
true.
you go in.
It gets a similar schedule, I guess, is a good way to put it.
Okay, if you say similar schedule, I would agree with you. I'd say more like 10 or 12 wins both years. Because, I mean, who will be 100% gone from this team?
I would presume Robbins would be gone, and I can't remember. Wright might have some time left too, but his body's beginning this year too.
I mean, with COVID, I'm totally lost on eligibility right now.
I don't even bother anymore.
Yeah, I don't either until it flushes its way out. Well, we've got 2 more years of it, correct?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. But yeah, you know, Chris, that the high end, we talked a little bit about this. My hope, and this was before we lost to Grambling, I think I said 8-10. Well, if you go 8-10 at this point, you're still only going to be 15-16.
Right.
So that would put you where you had to win 2 in the tournament to get to the NIT.
Yeah, I don't see a scenario that's realistic that gets anybody excited about him being back next year.
No, the only way is if we stay 100% healthy and shoot the basketball like we did the other night against that.
And go 9-9 and win a couple games in the SEC tournament.
That's the only.
Yeah.
And the odds of that happening are the other teams are going to have a lot of bad luck and some injuries, some of those top-level teams.
Yeah.
Because we play like 3 or 4 of the top-level teams twice? I know Tennessee,
they play Kentucky twice, although I don't know what to think about Kentucky. Tennessee twice.
They're still good. They're still good. They're not
historically good defensively. And then Alabama. I think they play Alabama twice, don't they?
We do. I think we play Arkansas, don't we?
Just once. But Alabama's the best team in the conference, in my opinion. And that's another thing, how they can get in the top 10 for Brandon Miller when he's in your backyard. To me, that's just another thing on the incinerating fire at this point. But are you ready for the mailbag? Let's just go there.
Let's do it.
Okay, our mailbag is presented by Sutherland & Belk, a family-owned injury law firm. If your loved one has been hurt in an accident, call Taylor or Russell. That number 615-846-6200. See what your rights are and if they can help. Let's just go in no particular order. VU Superior. Vanderbilt had a collie as an on-field mascot. Did you ever hear of bringing that back?
No, I didn't. That was in the 60s, I think, and I was a little kid then, so I don't, but I never heard it. No, I never heard. Now I will remember this. George Weicker. I don't know if you remember that name. He played for the Nashville Sounds, and he was a Vanderbilt assistant coach at one time under Mewburn. He and his wife were always down on the field in game days, and they had a bulldog when we played Georgia, and they dressed him up in a sweater that had Vanderbilt on it. And I never will forget, Herschel Walker scored a touchdown against us, and the dog was nipping at him, and Herschel turned to me and goes, "Do he bite?" That was hilarious. I don't know why that just hit me. Yeah, it was great.
Let's see. Another one from VU Superior. Do you recall the stadium club being built and what was its original purpose and why was its purpose changed?
I do. The stadium club was built to be a moneymaker. I thought it was a great idea at the time. It was over there by the parking garage near Memorial. And to have parties, to have all of the athletic activities there, banquets. Whenever we had a coaching hiring, it would be held in there. and then I think it was either mismanaged or it just didn't work out the way they thought. Because you could have wedding receptions there, all types of things. And after a while, I think it became a burden on the athletic department. And so they wound up selling it to either the university or an outside party. I don't know which, but I do remember it. And people could watch the game up there. They could come out and stay in the stadium club and eat, and then come out and watch the game out on that tier.
Okay. I listened to Vandy games as a kid. This also from Superior and Alabama Clear Signal last season. I literally couldn't find the local radio pregame show on the drive to the stadium. Why can't we go back to AM 650?
Chris, you can answer that better than I can. It's got to be cost, right?
I don't know. I mean, I for one, 650, the last I heard that management was not crazy about sports programming, but I don't know how much that matters anymore. I mean, man, if you got a phone, it is aggravating. Like if you don't have an unlimited data plan or something like that, or maybe if you're somewhere where you can't get a good signal. But the answer to this is just, and I get it. I'm not trying to make an excuse for Vanderbilt, but you can get these things on your phone these days. Although I think there's a little bit of a delay.
I agree. I think that I don't know who asked that question, but it might be an older folk like myself. That doesn't have all the technical. No?
Well, I mean, not well, I guess it depends on what you say is old, but I guess if you grew up listening to games on the radio, when all the games were on TV, it was a different time. And this person is from that generation, so.
Okay.
What was your first and second years at Vandy like? People, perception, facilities, players, staff, outlook, etc.
Wonderful. It was a family atmosphere. You hear that stuff now. Coaches always say it. That teams are like family. We hear it in recruiting all the time. The athletic department was that way. Rory Kramer made me feel like I was as important as Ken Hudgens, who was his right-hand man at the time. And I think that was the case for everybody in that department. Richard Baker, who was worked in the department for 53 years, helped with equipment and facilities, and then worked the mailroom in his latter years. Richard was probably the most popular person for the athletes to go talk to. He was an African-American, and all of our African-American players in every sport had a relationship with him. They'd make it go out of their way to go to the mailroom just to talk to him and chat with him. And if they had issues, they would, they had a shoulder to lean on. And everybody helped everybody out. It was different. It was better. And I know it sounds like an old curmudgeon, but it was wonderful. It was two of the best years of my life.
Ann Arbor Door, name 3 to 4 people associated with Vanderbilt in any role you believe had the most positive impact on Vanderbilt sports in the last 20 years. Also, give me the 3 or 4 that had the most negative impact in the last 20 years.
Well, I think 3 or 4 is a little too high. I don't, and there's others I could name, but I'm not going to name those names. In fairness to them, some of them are not here. Some of them have gone and left Vanderbilt. But anyway, definitely Gordon Gee was the positive. The biggest positive, I think. And I stated earlier that if he had stayed, I think things would be better now. It would be better now. The negative has been whoever you want to blame of hanging on to people too long. And also not being honest as a department about what we're doing. I think there's just been that they dangled the carrot, but they hadn't delivered. And hopefully that's about to change.
Okay, Dusty Orleans, do you think there was any reasonable chance to have retained James Franklin or was he leaving after the season even if Penn State didn't offer?
I think he was leaving. I remember in the locker room after the bowl game, all the coaches and him was in there, and he put one of his guys at the front door. One of the things equipment guys always do is go in after they're showering and get all their shoes and gear and get ready to take it to the dry cleaning. And he would not let us in an hour after the game. He was in there telling coaches, look, I'm gone. If you're going to go with me, you got to give me an answer in 24 to 48 hours or you're no longer on my staff. So it was a done deal. He was going, I think he had another option, other than Penn State. I don't know who that was, but I think if the Penn State thing had not worked out for whatever reason, he was leaving anyway for another school.
VA 72, top 3 best decisions ever made by the athletic department.
We've got to go back before 20 years. Again, Roy Kramer. And then obviously Tim Corbin during this era is by far the best. Jeff McDonald. The decisions to hire coaches like that, that's obviously the best. The worst decisions over that time, the same ones we talked about over and over, just hanging on to coaches too long and hanging on to administrators too long. People can. If anyone, I just wish we could go back in time and let people see Roy Kramer and the way he worked in the athletic department. It's obvious for what he did for the Southeastern Conference as well, but the care that he had, and he and everybody else followed suit. And that's the way it is. Whoever the leader is, you're going to do it. If the leader hides in their office, don't ever come see you, you just go do your job and get your check and go home in the afternoon.
When did David get disenfranchised? Because I would go over there, and that's back when the media would park in Magoogan.
Right.
I mean, he had a parking place, and I would bet for every time I was over there, his car was not there 75% of the time. Probably his last, 3 or 4 years on the job. Yeah,
I think that because David left right, the timelines are, I left in September of 18, excuse me, was when I met with David and told him I was resigning and gave him my letter of resignation. And let me just say this, David, away from Vanderbilt athletics, I picked him up at the airport when we were playing at Florida one time. We had some great conversations about his dad and just things outside of athletics. David was a fine person in that way. He really was. But running the athletic department, it was just a different story. The people around David shielded David all the time. I think David didn't know a lot that was going on. Now, I'm not trying to cover for David. If you're the boss, you're supposed to know. You're not supposed to let people shield you from things that need to be changed. But I think that happened. And of course, he had Candace, who he recommended for the job. So, he already knew he was ready to go. He told me in my exit meeting. I will divulge that. When we sat down and I told him I wasn't happy with the direction of the department, and he told me, he said, well, look, I'll be honest with you. They asked me to stay on here. He said, and he didn't say the word checked out, but basically he said, I've been packing up boxes ever since. So basically the last couple of years it was lame duck. Candace ran the department. She did. David still had to be the face of it, but he was letting Candace take the load.
Go Doors 94, top 3 head football coaches you've seen at Vanderbilt, top 3 basketball coaches.
Basketball that I've seen, Roy Skinner, Eddie Fogler, and I think Kevin Stallings.
That's fair.
The worst, I would go with Richard Schmidt. I'm not going to say who our current coaches are, in either men or women, because don't know yet. Richard Schmidt, Jan Van Bredikoff, although I think Jan was a very good X and O guy, but Jan was aloof, in my opinion. And I love Jan because Jan was, when I first started loving Vanderbilt athletics, Jan was a player at Vanderbilt, and a great player, by the way. And I hate to say that he wasn't a great coach, but if you're asking me for numbers, I have to go Schmidt and Van Bredikoff.
And football, I guess that would be probably
the worst. Rod Dowhauer was number one. The number 2 was the back end of Derek Mason's career. I'm not going to say you beat Tennessee 3 times. You're not the worst coach in history. I don't care how down Tennessee is. I get aggravated when people say, well, Georgia was down when they beat them in Tennessee. So what? That doesn't matter. If Vanderbilt beat you in football, shame on you because of what we were doing at the time to try to win and what you try to do to win. look at the millions they pour into it and what Vanderbilt doesn't do to try to help their programs at the time.
Yeah. Was that just a Jason Grooms thing when it got so much worse with Derek?
When you listen to one person, in my opinion, there's always somebody in your life you trust 100%, sure, and you love. But how in the world you can let somebody keep making idiotic decisions and you know that it's bad, and the only thing you can say is, well, he's young, he's making mistakes, but he's learning, he's a smart kid. Well, in my opinion, you get what you deserve.
I think they call that Jedi mind tricks.
Yeah, there you go. That's it.
Original Shydor, how did the evolution of social media impact players and team dynamics from your perception?
I hate it for the kids. I think it impacts them a lot. And I also, on the other side of it, I don't like it from the standpoint of the transfer portal stuff that they post, and thank you for all. It's so insincere, some of this stuff where they talk about I loved my time at X school, but it's time for me to move on.
Be a bulldog, and thanks for the memories, no interviews.
Can't stand that. It drives me nuts. So it's impacted in a negative way, in my opinion.
That's the end of most of the mailbag. What topics over the last 20 years are there that we need to get into that didn't? Because I've got some things saved for some other shows, but I wanted to get your perspective. You and I didn't really know each other very well most of the time I did this.
Right.
I'll go through this with Mike Rapp. We'll go through it from kind of the writing perspective. I've got another one playing with Seabass when I can get him on, because he's probably the most frequent guest on the podcast. But I wanted, there's it's almost paralyzing because there's so many things you can think of when it's a 20-year thing that it's such a big canvas that you don't know where to start. So what are maybe the topics and things that we should have gotten into today that we haven't?
Well, Chris, a 20-year span is just there's so much that goes on, from negative and positive. I'll be honest with you, we touched on just about everything at some point, I think. I just think the main reason we're in the situation we're in right now and let's just say it's football, basketball. I'm not saying as a department as a whole with all 16 sports. I'm just saying our situation right now with football, men's and women's basketball programs, we're in it for one reason: negligence and not letting go of folks and giving folks extensions on contracts when they don't deserve them and shouldn't get them. That's the two main things. And until they quit doing that kind of crap, we're going to get more of the same.
Hey, Luke, appreciate you joining us today. Look forward to catching you next week when I guess we'll have two SEC basketball games to discuss. The one with South Carolina here, and then the one at Missouri on Saturday.
Well, listen, Chris, thank you. I trust your Christmas and New Year was great, but I want to tell you, these last 20 years, and I've known you for 4 of them, I want to thank you for what you've done, because you went through a lot of life-changing things, and I can't imagine the stress you were under about and the back and forth of it. This is my last day of doing this. I can't do it anymore. We've even talked about it a couple times. But people out there, you better hope that Chris hangs on, because the next thing you're going to hear is there's nobody at the post-game press conference if he doesn't.
Well, I'll be honest. I think most people know I had open heart surgery May the 5th.
Yeah.
That I would do that probably 4 or 5 times again before I would go through the last 3 years on this beat again. And I'm not kidding one bit.
Wow. That says a lot. That says a lot right there.
Yeah, it's been, and some of the stuff that I've been through that I've talked to you about privately that it wouldn't do any good to come out with publicly.
People wouldn't believe it, Chris. They wouldn't believe it.
No, they wouldn't. And that's part of the problem too. The beat gets harder because the truth is stranger than people know. And when you start coming out with, this really happened. And I've even had people that were sources tell me, like, I run this through my head, and I sound like a crazy person just even saying it, but I swear this just happened. That has been life on the beat for 3 years.
Yeah, I don't doubt it one bit. I really don't.
Anyway, Happy New Year.
New Year. Maybe the next 20 will be great. I'll be in my 80s by then, and I'm sure when you talk to me, I'll have to leave my false teeth in by then.
I hope we live to see it. The thing that I've always, and I think that's the thing. If you want to distill this down to one thing, so much got blamed on David Williams and Zeppos for years and years and years, and people swore to me, this time it's going to be different, blah, blah, blah. And I just was going for several years. Like, I thought when they had that chance to reset with the new AD, that was their chance for sort of a jailbreak from the school to see what this could really be. And I thought, man, this could be fun. Yeah, I could cover maybe bowl games every year, and maybe there's a Final Four in there and something. I really thought, and that's what people were telling me, hey, this is a new day. It's all about to change. And I was dumb enough to buy it at the time, but in my defense, I did not have any idea how the machinery really worked and how deep it went. And once you've seen it and you faced it yourself, you get it. You do. You do. So you do. With that, have a Happy New Year, and maybe somewhere in 2023, we've got something better to talk about. Let's hope so.
Let's hope so. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Luke. Thank you for listening to today's episode. We thank our presenting sponsor, Jody Jones DDS. We thank our other sponsors, Sutherland and Belk and MyPerfectFranchise.net. If you're interested in sponsoring this podcast, and that's how we make this work, please email me at chrisley70@gmail.com. We also ask that you subscribe to our website, VandySports.com. That is $99 a year. You get things there that you don't get here. And of course, please rate, review, and subscribe where you see our podcast. That helps us get noticed. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at VandySports.com. Follow me at chrisley70. And finally, subscribe to our Vandy Sports YouTube channel as well. Thank you for listening to the Vandy Sports Podcast, which is part of the 440 Network. I'm your host, Chris Lee. We'll catch you with another episode coming very soon.